Bonne soirée et bienvenue à cette audience en ligne du Comité de dérogation pour la Ville d'Ottawa. Welcome everyone to this online hearing of the Committee of Adjustment for the City of Ottawa. The Committee of Adjustment is a quasi-judicial tribunal appointed by City Council to make decisions on certain types of applications under the Planning Act. My name is Anne Tremblay and I will be chairing this hearing tonight. With me are my fellow panel members, Mr. Scott Hindle, Ms. Julia Markovich, Mr. Colin White, and Ms. Kathleen Willis. Supporting us tonight, we've got some committee staff that I would also like to introduce. We have Secretary Treasurer Mr. Michelle Belmar. We've got the Deputy Secretary Treasurer Ms. Warner Brenning, and we have our committee coordinator, Ms. Cheryl Williams. So that's it for my introductions at this point of people. Please take note that this video conference is being live streamed on YouTube. The video will be archived along with tonight's agenda on the city's webpage. Before we begin, I would ask that you take note of a few comments that I'm about to make. So while the issues surrounding development in the city are broad, the Committee of Adjustment actually has a fairly limited mandate. So the committee can't do the following. We can't consider aspects of the proposal that are not related to the required variances. So if height happens to be an issue for someone and it isn't in fact a variance that's been applied for because it conforms with the zoning bylaw, we will not be entertaining discussion about the height of the building. We also do not address noise concerns, property maintenance concerns, or property values. We also do not talk about prosecution for illegal construction, which would be building without a building permit, for example. Also, we won't entertain personal comments regarding neighbors, agents, or applicants. And finally, we cannot entertain any additional variances that weren't part of the original notice. So if there's a need for an additional variance as we go through the application, or greater relief from the zoning bylaw is required from one of the variances that in fact does form part of the application, we need to recirculate in order to provide proper public notice. So with that, as part of the statutory public notification requirements, each applicant is required to post a sign on the property and to file a statutory declaration confirming the sign posting. So to my knowledge, we have one statutory declaration that's in for 135 Hinchy, and we will be taking either an oath or a solemn declaration for the remainder from the applicants or the agents. With respect to quorum, if for whatever reason the quorum is lost because of, well, for example, technical difficulties, the proceedings will be paused to allow time for the resolution of the issue. Failing the ability to reinstate quorum, however, the remaining items on the agenda will simply be put forward to the next regularly scheduled meeting of the Committee of Adjustment. And in this instance, Ms. Williams, can you tell us what that date would be? Or Ms. Brenning?
The next hearing date would be July 8th.
All right, thank you. So in that case, in the next 3 weeks, I guess with Canada Day being on a Wednesday, we're being pushed into the second week of July. So in terms of the hearing process, you will find the agenda that's on the screen at the moment. These are essentially the way that they are applied for, so that's sort of first in, first or next on to the list. It is up to the discretion of the chair to decide whether or not we will be changing some of the order of the applications to be heard. And I can tell you that this evening we will in fact be changing that order. So the note that the committee members have had a chance to review all of the application materials prior to the hearing and any written submissions that have been received either in support or in opposition. In addition, we will hear oral submissions from any interested parties as part of the proceedings, and this is whether or not you've in fact identified yourself as a speaker for the evening. The committee may ask for a brief presentation by the applicant, followed by some questions from the members where clarification may be required. The public submissions portion of the hearing will then be opened, and we'll hear from any interested parties to make submissions to the committee. Panel members may then ask you a few questions to clarify your position. When you're called upon to provide your comments, we will ask you to And I'm going to assume if we don't have it already, we'll ask you for your municipal address. We'll have your name, I'm hoping. And if not, then Ms. Williams will let me know where we need to get both your name and your municipal address. So then you will begin your submission by addressing your comments to the panel members. You may ask questions, but you need to direct them through the chair, so to me, and I will ensure that we get those questions answered. Limit your comments to a maximum of 5 minutes, and any exceptions to that rule is up to the chair. Once all interested parties have had an opportunity to address the panel, the public hearing portion of the meeting will then be closed. So in terms of decisions, the committee typically makes oral decisions either to grant or deny an application. The committee may, however, by exception, decide to reserve that decision. In such a case, the panel will immediately, following adjournment of the hearing tonight, deliberate further on the evidence to render a decision. In all cases, the committee will issue within 10 days of the hearing a formal written decision outlining the panel's reasoning on the matter. All decisions of the committee are subject to a 20-day appeal period, during which time the decision can be appealed to the local planning appeal tribunal for a fee. So at this point, I'm going to call for any business items, and I think the only thing we really have is any declarations of interest from the panel members. Mr. White.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have to declare interest on an item that is on the agenda of panel 3 today. That would be 15 Turtle Back. Reason for the declaration of interest is I occasionally do work for the agent on that application.
All right, thank you. Anyone else? Okay, so in terms of business, we don't have any minutes to confirm this evening. We have no adjournment requests, so we can move straight on to the applications. So we're going to deal with applications that we can fast track this evening. So we're going to start with application number 2, which is for 136 Glynn Avenue. Do we have the applicant or agent available to speak to that item, should we have any questions? Do we have the applicant?
Hi, I am here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. So, Mr. Ernst, we're not going to ask you for a presentation on this. I'm simply going to open it up to questions from the panel. So anyone have anything they would like to seek clarification on with regards to this application?
Excuse me, Madam Chair, we do need the statutory declaration on this one.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Yes, we do. So Mr. Ernst, I think it is. I need to get that from you, the oath or solemn declaration. So let me read this out and then you can respond. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the notice provided to you as part of the application process and by the committee was posted first on the property to which the application applies, secondly, for the prescribed number of days before the hearing, and finally, that it was clearly visible and legible during the entirety of the posting time? Can you either swear or affirm that to be true?
I affirm that to be true.
All right, thank you very much. So we can go back to, I'm going to ask again, any questions from the panel? I don't think I saw anybody have any questions about that. All right. Any members of the public want to speak either for or against this application? And I'm not seeing any attendees raise their hand. Okay, so with that in mind, Mr. Ernst, I think the only thing we would like to bring to your attention is that the Building Code Services have asked for an additional condition that is not part of the report that staff had written. So what we'd like to do, and it has to do with the fire separation. So the Building Code Services want to ensure that in fact there is that element that meets the building code requirements. So I'll read to you the condition that we're proposing to add, and you can confirm that either you're for it or we can have a discussion. that the owners provide evidence to the satisfaction of the general manager of the Planning and Infrastructure and Economic Development Department and or his or her designate, to be confirmed in writing from the department to the committee that the existing party wall meets the Ontario Building Code in 2012 as amended, which requires a 1 hour fire separation from the basement through to the underside of the roof. This verification may be carried out by a designer holding qualifications from the Ministry of Municipal Affairs. Alternatively, verification can be received by an architect or professional engineer. Are you okay with the addition of that as a condition?
Yes.
All right. So I think at this point we can go to a vote. Committee, what say you? All in favor? All right. So for the record, Ms. Brenning and Ms. Williams, I'm also in favor of the application. So with that, your application is approved. You have a number of conditions. I take it you've looked at those conditions.
Yes.
All right, and no issues there. So.
Nope.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much, then, Mr. Ernst, for your participation this evening.
Thank you all.
All right. Thanks. Okay. We're going to go to the next application, which is 257 Flora Street. We're going to deal with number 4 and 8 at the same time. So do we have the applicant or the agent? All right, so is that Mr. Burke and Ms. Burke? You're on mute, if you wouldn't mind unmuting, please.
Yes, Ms. Burke?
Okay. All right, Mr. Burke, your microphone is still muted. I'm not sure if you wanted to unmute.
There we go.
Okay. So we're not going to ask you for a presentation at this particular point in time. I think we're going to simply open it up to questions from the panel. Does anybody have any questions about either the application for consent or the application for minor variance? All right, okay. It's fairly straightforward. So given that, I'm going to open it up to the public hearing portion now. So if there's anyone who would like to speak either for or against this application, now's your opportunity. Don't have anybody registered.
Sorry, Madam Chair.
Yes, I need to do the, I knew that.
Yes.
I was thinking. All right, so I do need to get because you don't have your statutory declaration in for this. So for both applications, we don't have to do it twice. Let me read through this and you can respond. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the notice provided to you as part of the application process and by the committee was posted at the property to which the application applies for the prescribed number of days before the hearing, and finally that it was clearly visible and legible for the entirety of the time that the sign was posted? Do you swear or affirm this to be true?
I so affirm.
All right, thank you very much. So I think we've opened and closed the public hearing portion of this of both applications at this point. Anything else we need to address? I don't see anything, members. All right, there are, Ms. Burke, a number of conditions that are being imposed as part of the application. Are you aware of those? You've had a chance to read them?
Yes.
All right, any questions at all at this point?
No, we've sort of moved on a few of them already.
All right, that's perfect. So, all right, committee, we're ready for a vote. What say you at this point? Okay, the application is granted, and for the record.
Sorry to interrupt. Member Willis is looking for your attention.
Yes, sorry, Ms. Willis. Feel free to speak up, Ms. Willis, if you're on mute. Sorry, you're on mute, Kathleen.
Sorry, I was trying to speak up. Was this one of the applications that requires a building code, building separation, fire separation issue as well dealt with?
It's a party wall. Thank you. It's actually not the fire separation, it's the party wall. And in that one, so, and thanks for raising that. So Ms. Burke, there is again, Building Code Services has come back and asked us to ensure that in fact we have some element of confirmation of the location of the party wall. So I'll read to you a very brief condition that the owner provides certification from an Ontario land surveyor that the party walls are shown, are as shown, sorry, on the draft plan submitted. Are you okay with that?
Yeah, so just to clarify, the plan that was submitted didn't include that confirmation. Is that what it is?
I don't believe so. I think you actually have to, I mean, the plan is accurate to a certain extent. I think what we're asking is for that additional measure where you get a land surveyor that can actually say that once the severance goes through, that those walls are exactly on the lines that have been like the
Okay.
property.
Okay, yeah, I understand. All right.
Just to be absolutely certain of the accuracy.
Okay, got it.
All right?
Yep.
Any other issues? No, so I think we've approved the applications. We've granted both the consent and the minor variance. All right, well, thank you very much. For the record, I'm also in support. So thank you, Ms. Burke. Thank you, Mr. Burke, for your attendance this evening.
Thank you.
All right, the last fast-tracked application that we're going to deal with is, in fact, 311 Robin Lane. So do I have Mr. Frangione? Okay, so Mr. Frangione, you can please put your video on and unmute.
Unmute. Hi there.
Hi there. Great. Thank you.
Hi, sorry about that.
I know it can be tricky if you're not used to being on these things.
No,
so
I'm not.
No worries. We're all learning this stuff still.
Yeah, it's a little nerve-wracking.
For us too, I can tell you. So we're not going to ask you for a presentation at this point. So I'm just going to open it up. And before I do that,
Statutory.
get into a groove now,
Yes.
because I don't think you have your stat deck in. No,
No,
you don't.
no, I didn't.
All right. All right, so I'm going to read through this. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the notice provided to you as part of the application process and by the committee was posted first at the property to which the application applies, secondly, for the prescribed number of days before the hearing, and finally, that sign was clearly visible and legible the entirety of the time? Do you solemnly swear or affirm?
I do so affirm, yes.
All right, thank you so much. That's perfect. Okay. Questions from the committee? Anything?
Yes.
Mr. Hindle? Mr. Hindle, you are muted.
There we go. Quick question for you about the survey plan.
Yes.
I noticed in the front, I believe it's the front of the survey plan, it's a little bit off kilter. It's not in a straight line in line with the rest of the center line of the proposed division.
Right.
I was curious if there's a rationale for that.
Yeah, I noticed that as well. And frankly, I should reach out to the surveyor. I think he was perhaps trying to get two equal frontages there, possibly. Maybe that was his motivation for that arrangement. That's the only thing I can think of.
Yeah, I think you're probably correct. And then he wanted it to align then with the center line of the house as built.
I think so. Right.
Okay. No, that's fine.
Any other questions?
Nope, that's it. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Mr. White?
Just a quick question, perhaps staff can address this. I noticed that the MTO, Ministry of Transportation, indicated that the property is located within their permit control area. Just wondering about the process. How is that administered? How does that permit process work? Is it through the building permit process or some other mechanism?
Is there somebody who's our planner this evening? Is there
Madam
Mr.
Chair?
Haynes or somebody? Oh, so Mr. Hodgins, are you representing Mr. Haynes this evening?
Yes, I am for this application.
Okay.
Through you, Madam Chair, I'm not sure with regards to the MTO's comments how it would come into play here. I'm not entirely sure. I can't speak on behalf of the MTO, but I'm not, I wasn't aware of their comments on this application, how that would come into play for the severance. So unfortunately, I can't fully answer Mr. White's question on how that would work in terms of the permit process.
All right.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Perhaps for a future meeting, or we could get some information on how that process works.
That's a good point for sure. So I'm going to ask Mr. Belmar if you would add that to the list of matters or issues that we would like to explore with our planning and development department, so that we can understand that a little better and how it in fact should be dealt with once when we get these kinds of comments. So that would be great. We'll do that.
Absolutely, Madam Chair. We will add that to the list.
All right. You let us know when we get to, like, you know, a certain number of things on that list, because I think it'll be time for a meeting at that point.
All right. Will do.
All right. Any other questions or comments? All right. So I'm going to open it up to the public portion of the hearing. So anyone who wants to speak either for or against this application, now's the time to speak. And I'm not seeing any attendees or anyone raising their hands. So, so with that, I guess I'd just like to raise one thing with you, Mr. Frangione. It is Mr. Frangione, right?
Oh, sorry. I'm Jonah Bond. I'm the representative for Mr. Frangione.
Oh, Mr.
I apologize. I
Bond.
didn't introduce
Hey.
myself. Jonah, Jonah. My
All right,
apologies.
I thought so. I thought I recognized you. I thought, okay, I'm not sure enough, but okay, so
Yeah.
that's fine. We just see owner on your.
I understand. I'm sorry. Okay.
So that would be, so, and this, so I believe, Ms. Williams, we have Mr. Bond's municipal address information, I take it?
Yes, we do.
All right,
We have it on
okay,
file.
so we won't need to read that into the record for the moment. Did want to talk to you though about fire separation. It seems to be the popular item this evening.
I understand.
So, okay, so I'm going to read the condition quickly, and you can tell me if you're okay with it, or you'd even, let me read it. That the owner provide evidence to the satisfaction of the general manager of the Planning, Infrastructure and Economic Development Department, or his or her designate, to be confirmed in writing from the department to the committee that the existing party wall meets the Ontario Building Code 2012 as amended, which requires a 1 hour fire separation from the basement through to the underside of the roof. This verification must be carried out by a designer holding qualifications from the Ministry of Municipal Affairs. Alternatively, verification may be received by an architect or professional engineer. You okay with that?
I understand, and I'm okay with it.
All right, perfect. You've seen all the other conditions that?
I have indeed. Yes.
All right, perfect. Well, I think we're now ready for a decision. Committee, hands up, anybody in support? Okay, so the application is granted, and for the record, I'm also in support of the application.
Thank
So
you.
thank you very much
Thanks for your
for
time.
your participation this evening.
Okay. Have a good evening.
You too. Bye now. All right, now we're going to go to item number 1, 10 Eisenhower. Do we have Mr. Pilat? Yes, I see your hand. Come on, if you want to put your video on and unmute, Mr. Pilat. Hello,
Hello,
how are you this evening?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Very good, thanks. So we're going to request from you a brief presentation of your proposal. And if you have, Ms. Williams, if you can help with the site plan, that might be helpful.
Yeah, and do we want to do the statutory declaration first?
Yes, we would. We certainly would. Thank you. So, Mr. Flatt, do you solemnly swear or affirm that the notice provided to you as part of the application process and by the committee was posted at the property to which the application applies for the prescribed number of days before the hearing, and finally, that it was clearly visible and legible during the entirety of the time the sign was posted. Do you swear or affirm that to be true?
I swear.
All right, thank you very much. Okay. So, Mr. Blatt, the floor is yours to start your presentation.
All right. So what's on this on the slide is the addition of the deck to extend the existing cantilevered balcony, and this is the initial reason for the variance, where the distance falls under 30 meters required from the river's edge. So because the river kind of meanders at this part of the property, that's where I'm asking for the setback to be lower to 26.4 meters.
You actually have two variances that you're applying.
And the second one is about a septic system, existing septic system, which is not complying at this moment.
Okay.
So if you turn to the next page, right. So it's not that clearly visible, but there is that square in the middle of it, somewhere under R4R. That's where the septic system is. Actually, yeah, if you could go to the last slide, the last page.
Yeah, I think we can see it. We could make it out a little bit.
It's not. It's the page following the picture 1, picture 2, which has it clearly marked. There you go. Right. So this is the 20.5 meter setback for the septic system.
All right. Okay.
It didn't come out that well on this.
Okay, so it's just those two minor variances. Is the deck existing?
No, there is a balcony which is on the left of the rear of the building. So what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to extend the existing cantilevered balcony as a high deck towards the end of the house.
All right. Okay, thank you. I have questions from the committee. Anyone? All right. Mr. Lalonde, I know that you are with us today. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. Are there any comments that you would like to make about either of these minor variances?
Yeah, just following up on the comments that I provided to the committee. This application, we were looking at a little bit of a unique lens where the river itself kind of bends right at the corner, which affects the kind of the overall setback for the property. The rest of the deck, including the existing deck and the other expansions, or the majority of the expansion, is maintaining that 30 meters. It's just kind of that rounding out of the corner that comes into the setback. Based on the topography, the nature of the setback, the limits of what they're proposing, that is a cantilever deck, and understanding that it is not to be covered in any way, we're accepting that this is considered minor in nature and are not objecting to the application.
All right. Does anyone have any questions from Mr. Lalonde? Yes, Ms. Willis.
I'll get this unmute figured yet. Mr. Lalonde, with regard to the septic system setback, yep. If an application, if this was a vacant lot and somebody came in with an application to the septic office with a septic bed in this location, would you, like, it's hypothetical, but would it be something that would get approved potentially, or is it simply because this is an existing condition that it's okay?
So part of the discussions were what were the plans with this septic system. The Conservation Authority and the Ottawa septic system are not objecting to the septic system variance because it's an existing system. The intent is if they do need to replace the system, they have room in the front to replace it. There's another location on the property that would meet the setback. So over time, the expectation is that that matter would be resolved. and that the variance would not apply to a new system.
So we'd have to condition it such that the variance pertains only to the existing septic system, and at such time as one is to come back.
That's
Replacement
correct.
that it would, okay, thank you.
All right.
Madam
I
Chair?
think, yes, Mr. White.
Yeah, I have a similar question. Thanks, Ms. Willis, for asking that clarification. I noticed that reading the history on this septic system, that appears to be the septic field was constructed in 1989. My question is, was there a permit issued in 1989 for this septic field there in that location?
I didn't ask specifically the Ottawa Septic System Office because they provide comments to me. I didn't ask that specific question on when the date was, so I'd have to look that up and get back to you. I would assume there'd be a permit for the permit at that time, but I can't comment on that further.
Because 1989 would have been a zoning bylaw. And in fact, I'm not sure what the requirement might have been in '89 for the septic location. Can you tell me in general terms, would the standards have changed in terms of the setback from the river between 1989 and now?
I will say that as part of the zoning review for this application, it was not identified that it was not legal, non-compliant. So we're going on the basis that the application is looking to establish the variance of the current zoning. So I'm not really comfortable with making a comment on that because I don't know the old bylaw off by heart. Sorry.
Fair enough. Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions on this application at all? All right, I'm going to open it up then to the public portion. Anyone who has an interest in the application, either for or against, and would like to address the committee, now's your chance. I'm not seeing any attendees at all. No one's raising their hand. So, all right, so we can move on then to the decision on this application. Committee, I think what we're going to do, if you're amenable, is if we find ourselves approving this application, and then both variances would be tied to their existing condition. So, or A, the existing condition, and B, to the life of the deck itself, so that the variances aren't into perpetuity, sorry, and then would essentially die with whatever the removal of whatever that element is. Are you good with that? All right. In that case, I don't think there's any conditions to go through. Your vote on this, please. All right. Your application is granted, Mr. Platt, on the basis of what we had just suggested. For the record, I'm also in support of the application. Have you any questions for us?
No, thank you.
All right, great. Well then, thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
All right, thanks. Okay, the next application is 135 Hinchy. Do we have Mr. Kelly? All right, I've got two participants. Please go ahead and put your video on and okay, and unmute if you could. So I have Mr. Kelly, I can see, but I don't see you. And Mr. Irwin, Mr. Irwin, hello, Mr. Kelly, how are you? You're on mute, Mr. Kelly.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now. So Mr. Irwin, are you, would you like to put your video on? You don't have to.
Hi. I have a terrible reception out here in the country, so I'm not sure how this is going to work. You just dropped off a minute ago. Okay.
All right, so for this application, the committee would like to see a presentation. Mr. Kelly, Before though, let's see, do we have a stat deck to get approved here? No, we have your stat deck. Excellent.
Yeah, we handed one in.
Okay, excellent, good. Who's going to take on doing the presentation then here tonight? Mr. Kelly or Mr. Irwin?
Actually, we had somebody else that was going to be doing that. Oh,
Yeah.
Kirsten.
Yes. Yeah. I'm here today, acting as the agent for Mr. Kelly and Ms. Wing. So I'll be making the presentation.
All right, great, thank you. So just a brief presentation, if you will, and then the committee may ask you some questions for clarification. So the floor is yours.
Okay, so I've submitted a presentation. I'm just waiting for that to be online.
Madam Chair, could we get the name and address of the agent for the record, please? Thank you.
Yes, that would be great. So I'm going to ask you all, if you wouldn't mind, to do exactly that. So let's start with you, Mr. Irwin, and then we'll go to Mr. Kelly, and then finally we'll go to Ms. Nietzsche. Is that how you pronounce your name?
Yeah, Nietzsche.
Right.
It's hard.
All right, Mr. Irwin, first with you for the record.
Hi, it's 3044 Stone Ridge Road, Dunrobin, Ontario, K0A1T0.
All right, thank you, Mr. Kelly.
My address is 135 Hinchy Avenue, Ottawa, Ontario, K1Y1L5.
All right. And finally, Ms. Nietzsche.
It's 33 Ash Grove Crescent, Ottawa, Ontario, K2G0S1.
All right, thank you. All right, Ms. Williams, are we ready? Okay, great, thank you.
Perfect, okay. So today we're here to talk about two variances for 135 Hinchy. So just before we go into the details of that, there's some site context here. So the site is located in Mechanicsville neighborhood. And as you can see highlighted on the presentation here, there is a 1.5 story dwelling on this site. So it's on the east side of Hinchy. And you can see that the neighborhood is generally characterized on that side of the street by other low-rise residential uses. You can also see on the right-hand picture, the vehicular access is provided to the site via a rear lane. And that generally these lots are pretty narrow and long. So if we move to the next slide, we'll just briefly go over the two variances. So as per the submitted variance requests, we're looking for a reduction in the setback from the property line on both the east and west sides. So on the north and the south side. So the first one is to permit a lower deck to be located 0.14 meters from the southerly lot line, where the deck can be no closer than 1 meter. And on the second variance, it's for a reduction to 0.23 meters for the upper deck on the northerly lot line. So that illustration there just shows, the red line shows the required 1 meter setback, and then the blue outlines where the setback is actually located for the decks. So if we go to the next slide. So we've just provided some context here. So the decks have been built. The owners did hire a contractor, and we're not aware that they hadn't received permits. So we're here today to rectify that situation. So what you see on the left-hand picture is the upper deck that's been built. And as you can see, the northerly portion of that deck is runs in line with the edge of the building, edge of the house. And as I previously mentioned, these lots are fairly narrow in this neighborhood and are fairly close to the property lines, as you could also see on the survey. So the deck was built to be in line with the edge of the building. And then as you move through the pictures, you can see the lower deck. So the second picture there is showing the lower deck. And this is the one that's located 0.14 meters from the property line. And you can see that it actually is an access to the house as well. So this provides access to the door. And as you can see, there is a fence that does provide privacy to the next door neighbor. And the deck does jog away from that property line as you move away from that door. So really the main living area of that deck, or the usable area that you might use for, a table or sitting outside, is blocked by that tall privacy screen. You can also see, it's hard to see in these pictures, but another important thing to note is that this deck is located about 4 feet from the ground. And because the house itself is so close to the property line, By setting in the deck 1 meter, you'd actually be inside of where the doorway would be. So there'd be a variance required regardless if it was built at this point or not. And then even setting it in, you would end up with a 4-foot basically void where somebody could fall into easily, you know, small children, or during the winter time, you know, it was snow cover, you might not know there was a hole there. It's also important to note that because of the height of the fence, this deck is almost effectively serving to actually hold up the fence as well at this point. So, so that's the lower deck. And then you can see the third picture just shows the stairs up to the upper deck. So, and then you just move along, you can see the view from that upper deck to the adjacent neighborhoods to the south. So the rear yards, you can see those rear yards are actually dominated by cars for the most part. And that's a picture I took of myself standing on the deck. So you can see that there's very little overlook to the south. And if you were seated, there'd be even less overlook. So going to the next slide. These are just some more site photos. So that upper left picture shows that that's standing again on the upper deck looking to the north. And so what you can see is that the adjacent property to the north actually has decks on the second and third levels on both the side and the rear. And it's actually set back. There is a car, I guess a driveway between the edge of the subject property and that property as well. So there is anticipated to be little impact on that front. And so you can just see, these are just some site photos looking at the decks in the summer and just providing some other views. So moving to the next slide. Just some more neighborhood context. So as I mentioned before, these lots are fairly narrow. And so what you can see here is that a number of these houses on this side of Hinchy are actually very close to each other. And there's this existing condition is seen on that side. And then the other thing is because there is rear lane access for cars, a lot of people are parking their cars in the rear yard. And then they're using those upper decks. You can see there's a lot of front porches or rear decks or on the second and third stories to provide that extra amenity space that people don't have because of the parking situation in the rear yard. So moving to the next. We'll go one more, please. So this is just to wrap it up. It's a little bit hard to see, but the upper left is shows just the elevations of those decks, and you can see those on the back facade. And then, a side elevation showing the decks in cross section. And that's it.
All right, thank you very much for that. Questions from the committee? All right, I do have a question for you myself. In terms of the consultation that went on before the balconies went on, can you tell me a little bit about what happened there with regards to talking to neighbors or the community association?
I will ask, Mr. Irwin or Mr. Kelly to speak to that question.
I'm going to have to reserve that to Mr. Kelly as well. Just I wasn't involved at the beginning of the project.
All right, Mr. Kelly, or Mr. Irwin, sorry. Sorry, it's Mr. Kelly. Yes, Mr. Kelly, please.
Hi, thank you. So originally there on the bottom level there was a deck that was, I guess, 10 feet out and the full width of the house. So at the time, that deck was getting older and becoming a safety hazard. So our intention was to replace that deck through procuring a decking contractor. I was advised, that all the proper steps would be taken and codes met. And then as part of that, we did the full deck project. So essentially in the beginning, it was to replace what I viewed as an existing deck. So I hadn't, I've since been and met with the Mechanicsville Community Association and consulted with neighbors since that time.
All right, can you tell me if you came to any conclusions or anything with the neighbors as a result of those discussions?
I would say that the majority of the neighborhood has no problem with the decking, and it's similar to what is several other people around the neighborhood have, including community housing and social housing, John Howard Society buildings, which have balconies behind me. I mean, the majority of people had, no opposition to the decks.
All right, so my understanding is you've got screening on the north side. We saw that in the pictures. And sorry, I might have missed this, but on the lower deck, is there any screening from the neighbor to the south?
So yes, so the part that is close to the lot line is all there's appropriate privacy there, and then on the other part it steps back away from the fence, but there's still a fence along there. And actually, recently we've ordered some cedar hedges and been working on a garden box to where the gap area is, so that there would be a natural privacy effect from those cedar hedges over time.
All right, so, but no specific plans to erect a screen on the south side. You've got the fence, if I understand this correctly. You're thinking about vegetation.
Right. At this time, there's nothing formally planned except to the advice I'd received was to meet with this committee and present what has been proposed and built so far, and then go from there.
All right.
Can I?
So there's I'm going to take question from Mr. Hindle at this point, please.
Sure. Yeah. So I just had a quick question. I note, so in the plans, it shows a privacy screen on the north side of the upper deck. Is there one on the lower deck as well, looking north?
I can speak to that.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, Kirsten, just to make sure I'm meeting their definition, if you could just advise.
Sorry, Mr. Hindle, so you're just clarifying for on the lower deck adjacent to the southern property or on the north side?
In this case, I'm asking for the north side.
Okay, so yeah, the lower deck, the lower deck underneath, I don't know if it's easy to put back up the presentation. It might show it better, but the lower deck is underneath the upper deck. But the lower deck itself does not extend as far north as the upper deck. They actually have, Mr. Kelly, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but you have a hot tub swim spa that actually falls there. So the deck does not extend that close to the northerly property line for the lower deck.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then I also note, so in the plans, it shows a privacy screen on the upper deck facing the north side, but in the photos, it does not appear that there's one there. Is that a change that's already been made or one that's planned to happen?
That was one that was planned to happen through the permit process. That was one of the comments that came back.
Okay, so in this case, if we were to tie the variances to the plans, then we would get that assurance that it will be built probably this year, I imagine.
I can confirm that from my side.
Okay, great, thank you.
I guess I just need some clarifications. Are you telling me that the site plans already show all of the privacy screening requirements that we're looking for? Or we don't need to amend any plans at this point?
The site plan shows the privacy screen on the upper deck on the north side. So abutting that property on the north side.
All right, so Mr. Hindle, it sounds like we may need a revised site plan in order to meet your requirement.
Sorry?
Would we not need a revised site plan then to show show any additional screening that might be required?
If the committee decides that there's additional screening, I think from my perspective, we do have, for the lower deck, we have the fence that's there for the majority of what I would categorize as the useful space of that lower deck. We do have this section that extends to the stairwell to the upper, but I wouldn't categorize that as a space that one would be kind of sitting in and using on a regular basis. It's more a transitory space. And I think I'm comforted by the idea that, you're looking at adding in hedges or something in that gap with the southern neighbor that where the deck does jog in. But then, yeah, so long as we tie it to the plan and that the privacy screen on the upper deck on the northern boundary is installed.
All right, okay.
That
Yes.
fence is shown on the elevations.
Yeah, exactly.
Ms. Willis.
Just, I concur with Mr. Hindle, and I'm looking at, with my magnifying glass at the site plan, and I just want to confirm, I can't tell here that the existing privacy screen along the south property line that exists shows up on the existing site plan, correct?
It's shown as the wooden fence.
Okay, I just can't read it on this little plan. Okay, so it's already on the plan. So there's an existing on the south and a proposed on the north. So I'm fine with that.
All right, just wanted to make sure because I guess Mr. Kelly, Mr. Irwin, you're aware that there is a neighbor who has had some concerns with regards to in fact that her privacy. So have you had a chance to chat with that neighbor to the south?
Yes, I have.
All right, okay. And were you actually able to resolve things?
Through two-hour conversations, what I discovered through that process and discussion was I happily offered to address any concerns. There's a lot more issues related to our relationship from years and years and years that were subject to frustrations. So I basically left it the last conversation that, I tend to do whatever I can, but ultimately I'm going to look to the state for direction and follow what the requirements are.
All right, thank you. I am going to, if there's no other questions, I think I'm going to open it up. Mr. White.
Just a question to, I guess Ms. Nitschke could possibly answer this. Is it reasonable, and it's more a hypothetical on my part, is it reasonable to suggest that a functional decks similar to what we've got here could have been constructed in compliance with the zoning bylaw? And if that's the case, is it reasonable to take the position that the privacy issues, whatever they might be, would be essentially the same had the decks been constructed in compliance? Because I think we're talking about less than a meter of width here on each of the decks in terms of compliance. Is it reasonable to take the position that the privacy issues would be the same in both cases?
In my opinion, yes, it would be the same because, as you mentioned, it is less than a meter. So I don't think those issues would have changed because it's really hard to gauge without a measuring tape what that distance would be. And then you can also see too, like the lower deck where the deck jogs in, it's not quite 1 meter, but you can see on the survey, it actually is very close to the 1 meter. So, that actually shows that if there's still concerns for that portion, then it wouldn't have changed anything. So, yeah. So yes, I do. That is my opinion as well.
All right. Any other questions? All right. So I'm going to open it up now to the public portion of the meeting. So if anyone wants to speak either for or against this application, now's your chance. I see that I think we've got Ms. Cunningham, I think. Is that, sorry, I want to make sure I get your name right. Yeah, Cunningham, is that correct?
That's correct. Can you see
Yes,
me? Yeah, okay.
Yes, we can. Yes, we can see you.
Yeah.
So the floor is yours if you'd like to speak.
Sure, I had something prepared. Oh, good evening, Madam Chair. Anyway, I had something prepared. It may be a bit different now because some of the things I heard from Mr. Kelly are not true. And I think there's a mix-up. There's no hedges going in on my side. You can see from the photos that they've provided and one that I've provided that the upper deck looks directly into my yard. That little thing you see, that old fence with the lattice, that's not a privacy fence. That fence has been there for a while. And the stairs, when you go up there, it looks right into my yard. The upper deck looks right into my yard. And when people come out of the house along the side of the where the lattice is, they look right into my yard. So there's been no agreement on a privacy fence, which I think there's one on the north side. I don't know why we don't have it in the plan here, but I'll read my short presentation. You have received my letter from March outlining my concerns with the application. It was accompanied by 5 photographs. I would like to speak against this application. Most of all the work has already been done. 2 decks, outside stairs, and a new apartment. There was never any, and please know I am telling the truth, there was never any consultation or notice or communication with me, but their next door neighbor about this project, none. So this process is my first chance of any input. One point in my submission is that these variances are not minor. I would like to add that at least one of the other 4 tests of the Planning Act are not met. I believe the general intent and purpose of the Planning Act is not maintained, as the purpose of the side yard setbacks is to protect the privacy of neighboring properties. In addition, there are no circumstances peculiar to this property that would prevent the owner from developing in a way which conforms to a zoning bylaw. As my written submission outlines, my backyard privacy from 135 Hinchy has vanished after 30 years. The large deck on the new apartment on the 2nd floor has a view of nearly my entire backyard, as do the stairs. You can see that in this photo. And the 1st floor deck also looks onto my property when people are standing along where you see that lattice work. I asked the committee to consider whether they would have approved this application if it had come up to them before the construction took place. I'm going to say thank you. But first, I'd like to say there was no consultation. Mr. Kelly and I, after the week I was submitting my thing, came over and we discussed a few things without any agreement on anything, including a privacy fence, which I think the community association also talked with him, and they have seen my property and they're going to insist upon it. So I thank you for your time, Madam Chair. Please let me know if you have any questions.
All right. Panel members, anybody have questions? For yes, Ms. Willis.
I have a question for staff. And it's regarding the variance for the upper deck. If it wasn't for the variance for the upper deck to the north property line, and the applicant came in for a building permit to build the upper deck, would there be any requirement for a privacy screen on the south side of the upper deck?
Through you, Madam Chair, I believe the zoning bylaw with regards to projections of decks above, above second floors, it only states that decks should not be closer than 1 meter to a property line. So with regards to where the location of the deck of the 2nd floor looking into south, given that it is within that 1 meter setback, and if the property owner would come and propose a deck that comply on the northern side with the no closer to 1 meter setback, you would still have the same, let's say, the same result in this case. So, and I believe there's no requirement for a high screening either.
Okay, so just
it will be compliant.
So it's basically as of right, according to the zoning bylaw, that there's no screening from the upper deck on the south side of the upper deck. And I'm assuming the same from the staircase coming down from the upper deck?
That's right.
Thank you.
All right, other questions? All right, so I have a question for you, Ms. Cullingham. The fence, the picture that you provided was actually was very telling. How high is that fence then? Because we could clearly see the stairs. So the fence that we're relying on in this case as screening is how high? How high is that?
I didn't measure, but I think it would. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
8 feet maybe on the part with the lattice, and taller on the the part that's the taller part. So I didn't measure it, but I think it's probably 8 feet, yeah. But you can see when they walk along their lower deck, you can see them walking, they can see in. And when they go down, there's another area down below and then you don't see them, but they use that there's always people walking by. There's also the stairs and there's a tenant upstairs and a big deck, and all of those, they can all see into the entirety of my backyard. You can look at some of the photos they provided even, and you'll see that's true. And there's been no agreement to provide me with privacy. And 30 years I have lived there with no problems with privacy. So it's
All right,
it's shocking.
I'm going to call on Mr. Kelly then, just to enlighten me a little bit on some of that. I'm trying to get a sense of how much additional screening might be required to at least address the privacy from the standpoint that if you're standing on the deck, you can't see directly in. We all agree the minute you're going up those stairs, there's nothing else you can do. But at least on the lower side, how much additional height? And so I think I'm hearing that we're at 8 feet, which is quite high for a fence in the first place. But if you were to add lattice work or something, how much height?
Say something, it's 8 feet, but that's from my property. From theirs, it's not 8 feet because they have a walkway that's probably 5 feet. So they're taller when they're walking. So I can't see them, but they can see in mine.
Okay, and I take it that's part of the lower deck feature, right? It's part of that structure.
Yeah, it's kind of like well, you've seen the pictures. I haven't ever been in there, so I've just seen the pictures.
All right, so Mr. Kelly, going back to you, if we were to just put some lattice work in there, how much do you think you would need in order to block that view so that the people who are using that property couldn't actually see, as long as they're standing on the bottom deck, into Ms. Cullingham's property?
I mean, this was the part where I was pretty clear that I wanted privacy for my family as well.
I'm sorry, Mr. Kelly, I didn't quite hear you. You weren't clear to me. Sorry.
I would just say that basically what I'm seeking as privacy for my family is, well, the best you can in a neighborhood that has 3- and 4-story buildings surrounding you, and I have 2 young girls, so that privacy is important to me. My understanding from Kristen's expertise was that walkway section is a narrow walkway and not a gathering point. And also it's essentially 1 meter from the property line as well. So from a privacy perspective, it's set back. That's the part of the deck that's not at issue, in my understanding. I don't know if Kristen has anything to add on that.
Ms. Nietzsche, did you want to add anything?
Just to add on to Mr. Kelly's points is, just to clarify exactly that part of the deck is almost, although we don't have it measured out, but the survey shows almost in line with the 1 meter setback. So, if that had been moved 5 centimeters, we wouldn't be having this discussion. As Mr. Kelly indicated, he'll be planting cedars. Perhaps he hasn't done that yet, but there is still time within this,
But
this
not,
season
not
to
on
do
the
so.
south side. Not on,
Please
that's for the north side.
Okay, so I'm gonna keep.
There was never cedars.
All right, so Ms. Callahan, I think, let's leave people have the floor when they're
Okay,
speaking.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That was a misunderstanding from before, so.
So, and then also there is an existing tree there that you can see on slide 5, and these are winter pictures, so they don't fully illustrate the privacy that the tree that's existing shows provides as well, but there is privacy through that tree as well. So I think there has to be a level of understanding and balance that, we do have to move around decks. I can't speak for Mr. Kelly, but I don't think his family is going to stand and look over, but they do have to move on their deck, but that there is privacy attained through the existing fence in the area that they would be sitting and mostly using their deck. So it's just to add those points.
All right, thank you. Any other? Mr. Hindle?
Yeah, I just had a question for Ms. Cullingham. I note, I think it was mentioned that there was previously a deck, maybe not an upper deck, but a lower deck in that, roughly in that same space previously. So combined with that pre-existing condition, as well as the higher up decks that are on the neighbor on the far side of 135, can you explain to me the, other than the addition of the new upper deck, really the amount of change that's happened from the existing condition that was there previously?
Sure. You can see where from there's one of the photos I sent in involving the demolition. Nobody from the old deck could see into my property. It was down lower. Okay, which, and some of there's still down lower areas. There's just these other areas now that see into my yard. But before there was no seeing into anybody's yard either way. You see, there was they had it down at the, at ground level, well, also around below their windows, but they couldn't see into my yard. And now they're seeing, it's quite different. It's very different now. And it's noticeable to, anybody who comes over, it's and there's an upper deck with, a big deck where people gather and they see into my yard. And I'm not saying that they're deliberately looking into my yard, but I don't know who the next tenant will be.
All right,
Yeah.
Thank you. Ms. Willis?
Yes,
So Mr. Hindle, just Mr. Hindle, are you done? Or did you have any follow-on
No, I
questions?
said another one, actually. Maybe a question for staff. I know there's been talk of potentially adding additional screening on the south side. But if my recollection of the fence bylaw is correct, we have a limit of 6 meters before, or sorry, 6 feet, yes.
6 feet, yeah, 6 meters would be.
6 feet before either variances or an additional procedure would be required to do that. Is that correct?
Sorry, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I'm not 100% sure I understand the question. If we can double more, are you saying that there'll be like some sort of requirement of a high fence or something within the 6 inches where the...
Yeah, so I can clarify. I think my concern is that if we require additional screening on the south side for the lower deck, that effectively will result in a fence that's greater than what is permitted in the fence bylaw, which will create its own set of issues, potentially worse than we're working with today.
Oh, okay. Unfortunately, I would have to look into that, but I might think that it could create potential issues, as you're saying. I don't have the answer right now. If you like, I could sort of come back and get you sort of a better answer with regards to whether this will be a heavy impact.
Okay, no, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to mention that, yes, we could make sure that we look into it. It's another one of those issues that we should probably know a little bit more about. I think you are right, though, Mr. Hindle. I think that there are some height restrictions with regards to fencing. It does sound like in this particular case, the fence is already surpassing what that requirement would be. So it's, and I guess in a lot of these fence issues are often complaint driven. And Mr. White, maybe you can jump in here because I know you have some experience with this. But my recollection, my experience has been that a lot of the extra height in fences is often a neighbor complaint that raises the issue. If the neighbor is completely on board and in fact it is for reasons to protect privacy, then I don't know how egregious the whole thing really would be at the end of the day if we tacked on some lattice work. I'm just thinking you're already not in compliance. If the neighbor's okay with it, then and it works for everyone, I don't see an issue, but anyhow, it's just,
Madam Chair?
Paul, Mr. White, did you want to?
In my experience, if the screening is an integral part of the deck, a fence bylaw typically wouldn't apply. It's the same as a railing on a deck. If there are height limitations with respect to decks and that sort of thing, yes, but in my experience, fence, if it's an integral part of the screening is an integral part of the decking, it's not really a fence bylaw issue, as I recall in my experience. In any case, I just want to suggest, going back to my earlier point, it appears to me that a functional decks could have been constructed in full compliance with the zoning bylaw here, doing exactly the same thing essentially, albeit somewhat reduced in size, but at the same time, at the same elevation on the building, and in terms of the impact on the adjacent neighbors, the adjacent properties, the impact would be identical. So, I think we have to look at these applications from that perspective as well.
Okay, fair enough. All right, Ms. Willis.
Just a quick question from either Mr. Kelly or Ms. Nitschi, whether or not on the site plan, again, I can't read it very well, whether or not you can tell us the height of the fence from your side of the deck of the surface of the deck.
I'm just opening up the site plan, but I don't believe that it's there for the existing fence.
Yes, which is what is also proposed, correct?
Yes, but it's because it's existing, it wasn't included in the plans or dimensioned.
Right, but so Mr. Kelly or Mr. Irwin, can you not notionally give us some sense of what that height is?
It looked, if we look at the photograph, it looked to me like it was almost as high as the door, but I'm not 100% sure from the photograph that we saw in the last discussion.
Hey, Mr. Kelly, give us a ballpark on the height of that fence.
You're on mute.
You're on mute. You're on mute.
Sorry, and I just wanted to clarify that the previous deck was at the exact same height as the current deck, because walk directly for to it. And also, I did not set the severe hedge did have ordered, and I've essentially been waiting for the date just to see what the outcome is. But those hedges are ordered and have seats and invoices when you need proof. But the height of the deck along the deck, sorry, the fence along the deck on that side is about 7 feet if you're from the bottom of the deck.
So the walking portion that Ms. Mulligan is talking about. Sorry, I'm not catching.
So when you walk out of the house, you're on the deck portion that's attached to the fence. But then as you walk further along, I have a picture I can show. I don't know how well anyone can see it from here. But when you walk, the privacy or the deck that's along the fence is higher. And then once the deck moves away from the fence, then that's where those cedar hedges would go. And that is the part that's stepped away. Basically, I think Kirsten said we're 5 centimeters short of the setback there that wouldn't require anything. But essentially that little gap there, and you can see we've already cut out some section there to match the cedar box to the exact space where there's the tree to the fence connected to the part, so that you'd have a full screen of privacy there is the idea. Sorry, there's the glare.
All right.
That's
I just want to clarify. So Ms. Milligan can just
That's
let
the
me
north
clarify.
side.
Ms.
He's
Milligan.
talking about the
I know.
north side.
I know. So that's okay. If you wouldn't mind, just wait till
Okay.
I give you the floor. If that would be all right.
Okay.
Because what I really am trying to get at here is it sounds like, for the most part, the former deck is that so there's a portion of your lower deck that is in fact the same elevation that the previous deck was. However, you have a stepped, there seems to be a stepped portion to your deck. Is that correct? And that's where you rise to the point where you're now, able to look over the fence on Ms. Mulligan's side. Is that correct?
That narrow section, I think, is what she's referring to when she talks about that, and which is exactly why we're working to put those that very elaborate and high cedar hedge in there, because just as much as one person wants privacy, the other person wants privacy.
All right. Okay. I think any other question, Ms. Willis?
I think there's a misunderstanding here. Ms. Cullingham is saying that the hedge is going on the north property line, and Mr. Kelly is saying that no, it's going on the south property line adjacent to her property where it steps down. Is that correct?
That's correct.
I'm not aware of cedar hedges on the south side.
Okay, well, just bear with me. It's in the little notch that he's been talking about. I don't see it specifically on the site plan. Is that something, do you have a landscape plan? I can see some other trees that are shown on the north property line, but can you add that cedar hedge structure onto your site plan?
Absolutely, no problem at all.
Okay.
All right, and it is just now, because I'm totally confused, we are talking on the south side.
Yes.
Thank you. All right. All right, Ms. Mulligan, one last comment. Go ahead.
Okay, this is the first I've heard of cedar hedges, but it still won't solve the problem of the privacy from the deck upstairs and the stairs, or along that little gangplank area. So I don't understand how that would solve my privacy problem.
Not from the top deck, that's for sure. So
No,
we're
but
just
even
trying to.
Unless it's right along the side, I don't know, because I haven't heard of it before now. So that'll be a couple of years away. I would be quite happy to discuss privacy screening, privacy fencing. There's all sorts of designs. I don't want to give up my birds and air with a big, huge thing anyway, but maybe there's lattice and, something to give me a sense of more privacy.
All right. Okay. Thank you. I'm going to ask at this point if there's anyone else out in the public who wants to speak to this application, either for or against. I don't see any other attendees or anybody with their hands up. So I'd like to call this portion of the hearing on this application, the public portion, closed, if I could. So going back to then the committee and having to make a decision. I'm just looking, Mr. Kelly, Ms. Nietzsche, at Mr. Irwin at the staff report. There's a number of items for information. You've read the reports. Are you familiar with what's in there? Okay. So I'm going to call a vote at this point. Ms. Willis. Yes.
I just like in preparing for this vote, what I would like to do is I'm prepared to support this application, but I do think that we should confirm, it doesn't show up on the site plan, that we add a condition that the cedar hedge with its structure be included on the site plan along the south property line in that cutout. I think it's self-explanatory, but I think we should put that on the site plan to alleviate Ms. Cullingham's concern.
Anyone else? How do you feel, Ms. Markovich, Mr. Handel?
Yeah, I would agree with that. So just tie it to the revised site plan, including the hedges.
All right.
Agreed.
It's okay. So there's so the public portion, Ms. Cullingham, is closed. So we won't be hearing from you on this. The committee is going to make a decision one way or the other. All right. So I take it then, Mr. White, Ms. Willis, I know already, Ms. Markovich, Mr. Hindle, you are in support of the application?
Yes.
Ms. Markovich? Ms. Markovich, are you in support? Okay, I'm not seeing any response from Ms. Markovich at this point. Am I the only one?
She's gone black.
I think she's frozen there. So, okay. I'm finding this one difficult, and I'll tell you why, is because the one thing that I think the committee really likes to see is consultation with neighbors when you're into a situation like this. And I'm not moved by the argument that, well, you know, if you found the 1 meter, then you wouldn't even be here. Because I really hope that regardless of whether you're meeting the zoning bylaw requirements or not, that you take the time to talk to your neighbors when you're proposing this kind of development in an urban area where it is you're so close to your neighbors. So I find it really unfortunate that we're finding ourselves in this position. I'm going to support the application as, I don't know if I actually mentioned that, but I will support the application, but I would like to see the amendment that was raised by, I can't remember if it was Ms. Willis or Mr. Hindle at this point, but the idea being that, yes, let's get a revised site plan. Let's show that on the plan so that at least we see some sense of, you know, hopefully with the vegetation will have gone some way in addressing some of the issues. Won't be an immediate solution, but hopefully in the fullness of time, it'll certainly be better than it looks today. So, all right, is everybody in agreement with that? Ms. Willis?
I just saw an email from Ms. Margovich saying that her battery died and that she would like to support, I think she sent it to all of us, this approval as amended by the necessity for a cedar hedge, but I don't know in terms of rules for procedure whether or not that's for vote for the candidate. I don't know.
I'm going to look for Mr. Belmar's advice on that, please. Oh, are you back? Wait, maybe she's back, so we can.
I'm so sorry.
Right.
My tablet died and then I had to reboot. I apologize. I had emailed to say that I supported what Kathleen had said around having a revised site plan to show the commitment for the hedges and to ensure the privacy. Sorry for that.
All right, no, great. Glad to see that you were able to rejoice. We do have 2 more applications.
Pivotal moment. I love
so
to
great.
just disappear.
Okay, so I think that's it. I think your application then is granted on the basis of that amendment. So thank you for joining us this evening and for discussion. I would recommend to you, Mr. Kelly, though, do reach out to Ms. Mulligan. I think it'll go a long way to just see if there's any more room for discussion and issue resolution around the privacy outside of our committee, but I'm just saying. All right, thank you very much. Enjoy your decks because it's good weather. And
Thank you, everyone.
all right, thank you.
Thank you.
Last but not least is applications 6 and 7. So do we have? I've got quite a few speakers to this. That is the applicants from what I can tell. And that would be for 105, 107, 109 Irving Avenue. We're dealing with 6 and 7 together.
Yes, hello.
Hello, is it Mr. Lalonde?
Yes, Nick Lalonde.
All right, so Mr. Lalonde, just bear with me for a moment. Just want to make sure. Okay, I don't believe you've got your statutory declaration in.
I do not.
So we only need to do it once, even though it's 2 applications. So do you solemnly swear or affirm that the notice provided to you as part of the application process and by the committee was posted first at the property to which the application applies, secondly, for the prescribed amount of time before the hearing, and that the sign was clearly visible and legible for the entirety of that time? Do you either swear or affirm that to be true?
I do so swear.
All right, thanks so much. Okay, we're going to need a brief presentation from you, Mr. Lalonde, if you will, please.
Okay, I don't really have any documentation prepared other than what was provided.
I think you're getting some assistance on that right now.
Perfect. So we're very similar to the previous applications that were fast tracked. We're an existing 3-unit dwelling opposed to 2-unit. So 3 townhouses that have been under 1 ownership, and we're looking to sever them, legally speaking, into 3 separate lots, and looking for the required minor variances to do so.
All right. Any questions for Mr. Lalonde from the committee. Mr. Hindle.
Monsieur Lalonde, it's my understanding that the water line and septic lines have already been separated out so that they are individual services now?
Correct.
Okay, perfect. And then the variances that are proposed are similarly just regularizing what is the existing condition. There's no real changes proposed?
That's correct.
Okay, perfect.
All right. Anyone else? Okay. In that case, I'm going to open it up now to the public. I don't have any speakers on deck according to my list, but does anybody want to speak either for or against this application? Not seeing any. No hands. No one is looking to appear. So before we go to a vote then, I just want to mention a couple of things. So you've got a number of conditions. Have you had a chance to read the staff report?
Yeah, most have been addressed, but I'm well aware of the conditions in the party wall.
So you know that we're looking for a party wall, that a condition to be added, it would appear, that the owner provides certification from an Ontario land surveyor that the party walls are shown on the draft plan?
Correct.
All right, so for the record, we're adding that one. I don't believe it was part of the original report. Let me just check that. No, it wasn't. So we're going to add that one. The other one I think that we also need to add on this application is fire separation. So we got the same thing from the building code services. So I'm going to read it to you and you can tell me whether or not it's fine to add. That the owner provide evidence to the satisfaction of the general manager of the Planning, Infrastructure and Economic Development Department or his or her designate to be confirmed in writing from the department to the committee that the existing party wall meets the Ontario Building Code 2012 as amended, which requires a 1 hour separation, fire separation from the basement through to the underside of the roof. This verification must be carried out by a designer holding qualifications from the Ministry of Municipal Affairs. Alternatively, verification may be received by an architect or a professional engineer. Are you okay with the addition of that?
I am.
All right, okay. I'm trying to think why we didn't fast track this one, to be perfectly honest at this point.
That's okay. I had fun.
I beg your pardon?
I said I had fun watching the others.
You did, eh? Okay. Oh, good. I'm glad we were entertaining. Is there anyone out in the public that has an interest in this application and that wants to speak either for or against? Again, I'm not seeing anybody raise their hand. I don't see any attendees appearing. So that closes the public hearing portion. So before we go to a vote, anybody have anything additionally that they want to raise, talk about, do anything of the sort? No? All right. Okay. All those in favor of both the consent and the minor variance? All right. So it looks like, Mr. Lalonde, the applications, both consent, minor variance, are approved. And for the record, I'm also supporting the application. I think
Thank you very much.
You've read the remainder of the conditions. You're aware of them.
I am.
Okay. All right, great. Well, thank you
Thank you
very
so
much
much.
for
Have a great
hanging
night.
in there with us and
No
have a great
problem.
evening.
Take
Thank you.
care.
All right, motion to adjourn. Motion, do I get a motion? Okay, Mr. White, seconded by Ms. Willis. So the meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much. And have a great evening.